I'll start off with some nerdy science stuff, which you don't think of nerdy science stuff when you start thinking about storytelling. But scientists have discovered that stories actually cause our brains to release a hormone called oxytocin. And oxytocin is also known as the hugging hormone. It is also known as the love hormone, and I'm trying to think, there's about 4 or 5 other nicknames for it. But basically, come on in. When we hear a story, that our brains release this oxytocin into our bloodstream. Oxytocin basically allows us to empathize and allows us to sympathize with people. And that's why when we watch, say, an action movie, and probably more the guys in the room than the girls, but for some reason when we finish an action movie, we want to punch something. And it is because we got swept up in that storyline, and our brains dumped the oxytocin into our bloodstream, and we were empathizing with the main character, and we got energy to get rid of. That's why when we watch scary movies, if we really get attached to the characters, there's a real reason why our whole body goes out to those people. That's why we scream at the screen. It's because of oxytocin. But it's also why we, want to be near people. It's why we want to hug certain characters in stories. How many of you guys have ever finished a book, and at the end of the book, you're really sad because now you have to leave those people behind? Or you watch a movie or a TV series, and at the end of that, you just really feel empty. Well, it's because you have had all this oxytocin being dumped into your system, and there's nothing we can do about it. Our brains are just going to do that to us. And so we formed a bond. So storytelling, we know through science, makes us create these bonds with people. And so that's why it's really important for storytelling, especially with children, is it's going to make a stronger bond. Now there's all kinds of other benefits for storytelling with your children. It's going to improve communication skills. It will teach, some of this is the same stuff you might have heard if you've ever come to, say, a library program, or I know I've done another one of these where I talk about the importance of reading to your child. Or I know Kate did a program for Success by 6, last month or the month before that, on growing a lifelong reader. And she probably talked about that too, that when kids hear stories, they learn speech patterns, they learn how dialogues work, and they learn new words. Same with storytelling. So storytelling is also important for that reason as well. So not just the oxytocin and the empathy, but we are really building good readers when we do storytelling. Now, how many people in this room, by show of hands, how many of you are storytellers? Raise your hand if you're a storyteller. Oh, good. Most of you have accepted it. Raise your hand if you think you are not a storyteller. Who in here is not a storyteller? And you are wrong. You're the only person. Sorry, I hate to call you out on it. But you are. The thing is, we're all storytellers. Typically, by the time we're an adult, we all realize that when we say storytellers, we're not just talking about somebody like me that makes animal sounds in front of a room full of kids. When I say storytellers, we all tell stories. We tell stories every day. We get home from work and we go up to our spouse or significant other. You will not believe what I had to go through today at work. Or you go to work the next day. You will not believe what I had to put up with at home last night. That is storytelling. That's anecdotal storytelling. And that's key for humans to interact with one another and for that oxytocin to get dumped and for us to form these bonds with people. And so it's very, very important that we all recognize that we are all storytellers. Now, storytelling is probably the oldest art form. And I've had people who are like, oh, what about painting? No, because I bet before the cavemen were even painting on the walls, they were standing around going, which is a terrible story. But I'm sure that they did that before they even started painting stuff on the walls. And so I really truly believe that storytelling is the oldest art form. And it is an art form. Some people question that too. I've been to schools where kids are like, oh, storytelling's not an art form. Oh, it is. Because we all know, we all have that one person. I bet we went around the room, we could all name one person in our life that when they start talking, we want to hear what they have to say. And those are the storytellers. And on the flip side of that, we all have at least that one person that when they start talking, we start going. Typically, they are not the strongest storytellers in the world. They have not developed that part of their art form. They have not developed their storytelling art form. So, like any art form, we have to have a good foundation before we can actually learn how to grow our storytelling abilities and how to use them. So that's what we're going to do first. Now that you guys know that storytelling is important, we all have to have a good foundation for storytelling. All stories, all good stories, have three main parts. And when you hear what those are, you're all going to be like, duh. Beginning, middle, end. Now, I know those sound really basic and you're thinking, yeah, well, duh, they all have that, right. But the thing is, if you look at stories that maybe have not been good, TV shows, books, again, those people that you do this to when they're talking, they're probably missing one of those elements when they tell you a story. Without that beginning, you're leaving your audience lost right off the bat. Because that is where you establish your who, what, and where, and when, that. You are establishing that setting. It's like when you walk into a conversation that has already started and you're already lost. Because those two people were already talking, you missed the beginning, you're lost. And if you don't know how to develop the beginning of your story, well, you're automatically starting out at a disadvantage for your audience because they're going to look at you like, I don't know what you're talking about. Right. You've got to establish who, what, when, where, all that fun stuff. So, for instance, if I was to tell you guys about a story about a time that I got a wad of gum stuck in my hair, do you think it makes a difference as to when that story took place? Like, what if I said that happened when I was like 7 years old? Then we'd all be like, oh yeah, little kid. What if I told you it was last week? Does that change that story? I didn't even tell you the rest of the story. I just told you one element of the beginning of the story that I just twisted a little bit, and it made it a whole new story. So it's very important to have those elements in the beginning so your audience isn't lost. It doesn't have to be really elaborate. I mean, you don't have to take a lot of time to decide, okay, where is the story taking place? You can always just say, when I was in school. Well, right there, you've already given a location and you've already given the time frame. So it doesn't have to be anything like, I remember it was 1978 when no, you don't need to do that. Just, this one time. That's establishing a time frame. Where your story takes place kind of helps out. I mean, if you're going to tell a story about a time that all these chickens flew in the room and some reason the clown came through chasing them, that story, where that happened, is going to make a big difference impact on the story. Because if you're at the circus, everybody will be like, oh yeah, that's believable. You're at church. Woo! Again, changes the whole story. So just take a moment before you tell a story to think, am I going to start at the beginning? Am I going to start with where the story takes place, who's in the story, and when the story happened? Really, if you can get those three key things, you're good to go. So that's what happens at the beginning of the story. In the middle of the story, that's your meat of your story. Now, I'm sure we've all heard stories or read stories that did not have a substantial middle to them. And those are typically the ones where you get really sucked into the story, and then they're like, and they lived happily ever after. Yeah, well, what happened in the middle? You're just, without that, it's not a memorable story. I tell stories all the time at schools, and when kids come up and actually ask me to tell the story again, they never say anything about the ending, and they never say anything about the beginning. They're always like, hey, do you remember the time you told us the story about those bunnies and the wolf caught them and threw them in the big pot of water? That all happened in the middle of that story, and I know exactly what story they're talking about. Without a good middle, your story is not memorable at all. So, then that takes us to the ending. This is where most people falter in their storytelling, is at the end. If you don't have a good ending, you're going to leave your audience wanting, well, they're either going to feel disappointed or, well, disappointment's a good way of saying it. Unless you're planning on telling a cliffhanger, and those aren't good for conversations. You can't be like, I'll tell you next week. No. So you actually want to kind of tie up all your loose ends. Now, again, all of this so far sounds like, oh, well, you're talking about, once upon a time type stories. No, not necessarily. These really can just be anecdotal stories. And if you don't kind of close your story up, like when somebody gets a phone call right at the end of their story, and then for some reason you never finish the story, does that bug the rest of you guys? Yeah. Because they didn't finish the story. So when I was a little boy, I loved fishing. I loved going fishing with my grandfather. It's one of my favorite activities growing up. Now, my parents lived on the end of a long gravel driveway, And so whenever anybody would show up, we could hear them coming before we actually saw who it was. Well, I knew my grandfather was coming to pick me up this weekend when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And I was in my house. I was already had my fishing gear ready to go. Sun wasn't up. I was just waiting. Heard a truck coming down that gravel driveway. Grabbed my fishing stuff. I looked out the door. It was him. He yelled to my parents, "Grandpa's here!" And I ran outside, ran right up to his truck. He opened the door, "Get in here!" And I threw my stuff in the back of the truck. We drove for half an hour to get to his top secret fishing hole. Nobody in the whole world knew about this spot but him. And it was apparently when he discovered when he was a boy. Well, we got there just as the sun was just beginning to peek up over the top of the trees. So we got all of our fishing gear set out, and I got my hook all baited up, and I cast it out, and I was the first cast. It hit that water just as the sun was starting to reflect in it. It was like a mirror. That bobber hit, bloop, perfect rings going across the top of the water. Within 2 minutes, that bobber slammed under the water, and I set the hook. I must have fought that thing for 30 minutes. A couple of times the line went under a log, and I thought it was going to snap. But finally, I kept reeling and reeling. I got it about 2 feet from the shore. It was a good day. How's that for a story? No. That's terrible. What happened next? Without the ending of your story, your audience is going to be looking at you like, "What are you doing?" Exactly. And I would like to tell you I know what happens there, but I made that entire story up. I have no clue. I actually lived off 10th Street. And we I don't know. I did love fishing with my grandfather, but normally I had to ride in the back of the pickup truck and avoid the red man being spit out the window. Totally different than the tale I just told you. But that's what I'm saying. If you don't have a good ending, you're going to leave your audience wanting more. Another perfect example of the importance of a good ending is about 7 years ago, I was invited by Eagle Radio here in St. Joe that has Q Country and KJO and KFPQ. And the on-air staff invited me in to talk to their salespeople and their on-air talent about storytelling. And they actually did this to me. They go, "Hey, why did this joke not work this morning?" And they played something for me. And it didn't work for the same reason that Saturday Night Live doesn't work, or didn't work for a good number of years there. It's because they didn't know how to end the bit. And that's the thing. If you go back, there was a time frame. If you watch Saturday Night Live on a regular basis, that you get to it and you're like going, "What?" It's because they didn't know how to end the sketches. The music would just go up and they pan the camera back and you were lost. And that's what I told them. I was like, "You're just not wrapping your jokes up." Then I also had to tell them, if you're telling a joke that needs to be delivered seriously, you don't laugh through the whole thing. This guy got arrested at the gas station. The cigarette caught the gasoline got on his sleeve, and arm got caught on fire. Got arrested for brandishing a firearm. Yeah. It's like that joke would have been so much better if you wouldn't have laughed through the entire thing. But ultimately, it was the not having a good ending to the story. So make sure when you're telling your story, the more you do this, the less you actually have to think. Does my story have a beginning, middle, and end? It's just a matter of practice. Tell the story, tell the story, tell the story. The more you tell stories, the easier that will come. So, beginning, middle, and end. Very important. So now we're going to talk about the tips for telling stories. So I already told you the beginning, middle, and end are important. So how do you actually make people want to sit and listen to you? Well, it's a little tricky, I can tell you. But I will give you a few tips. Tip number one is this. You have to think of what the reaction is you want out of your audience before you tell your story. It sounds simple enough, but I have been places that shall remain nameless. They're like, "Hold on, we're going to finish up story time right now, and then we'll get the kids settled down so that you can talk to them." And then they're like jumping all over the room, around the room, telling the kids a story. And I'm like going, "No, that's not going to settle them down. You've got to think of what you're wanting out. Just like if you're going to put a baby down to sleep, you're not going to go, 'Once upon a time.'" What do you want out of this? You've got to think about that. So that's the first, besides your who, what, when, where, your beginning, middle, and end, you need to, very next thing you need to do is you've got to think of what are you hoping to accomplish? If you're just hoping to accomplish, passing memories on to somebody, well, you know what? It's going to be a little less strenuous process of building that story than, say, if you have to turn around and sell an idea to a bunch of coworkers. Because it's selling a bunch of coworkers on your way of thinking. Is that storytelling? Yeah, that's storytelling too. I mean, storytelling is everywhere. That's going to take a little bit more prep. So you got to think, what are you wanting to get out of it? And then that's going to affect these next things. 1, body language when you tell a story. Any hand talkers in this room? You raise your hand if you're a hand talker. Be proud about it. Yeah, me too. I am a hand talker. I cannot help it. As you have probably noticed, I talk with my hands. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. There's a couple times you shouldn't tell stories with your hands. One is if you're giving like a professional talk. Probably should try to keep your hands on the podium or something if you got it in front of you. 2 is if you're ever interviewed on TV. I still do it a little bit when I'm on KQ2 doing stuff. I was like, oh. So I hit Bridget in the face one time. You go this? Oh. Yeah, so be careful. So, other than that, I don't mind a little bit of it. You just don't want to make it distracting. If I was talking with my hands like this, yeah, you guys are not going to be paying attention to anything I'm saying. A little bit of this, not a big deal. So hand talking isn't bad, but your body language sells a lot. If you guys were all to walk in this room, and I would have just been standing here like this, you guys think you would have been expecting a good time tonight?
No.
None. We don't even have to tell people things. We don't have to even give verbal clues at all. As soon as they see your body language, people know. When I go and do school assemblies, and I'm trying to get kids to go all excited about the summer reading program, if I was to go into those schools and go, kids, summer reading program's coming up June 1st through July 31st. It's going to be a lot of fun. Hope you guys can all join us. We're going to have magicians and puppeteers and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, see? Is that going to get them excited? Not at all. Instead, I look like Robin Williams, who had about 10 Red Bulls when I went to school. I am all over that place. I should be a lot thinner is what I'm trying to tell you. But that's what I do. If I want that kind of reaction from the kids, besides conveying it with my voice, I have to convey it with my body. I can't just stand there like this. I'm over here talking, big hands, big movements. That's what I'm trying to do. If I'm trying to put a baby to sleep, or I'm telling stories to a little one right before I want them to try to calm down, they're not going to be that big. In fact, I'll probably do really slow movements with my hands instead of quick, especially if you start doing a quick one while you're doing this bedtime story. I'll do that slow. So think about your body language. I think, and maybe, if you guys are up for it, anybody in here feel like telling a story with only body language? I'm not going to make everybody do it because there's always somebody who's like, oh, I'm not doing that. That's okay. You don't have to do it. But anybody who would like to try, I want to prove to you how we can tell a story using only our body language and no words. And to do that, you have to be able to do everything that I can do. Can you do everything I can do? Let's find out. Can you do this? Very good. What about this? All right, perfect. Okay. But you do have to stand up. Stand up, stand up, stand up. All right. So, only do what you feel comfortable with doing. And I should feel less comfortable doing this as quickly as I wolf down my supper, but I'm going to do it anyway. We're going to tell an entire story using only body language. If you can see me, awesome. If you can't see me, just look at who can see me, because they should be doing what I'm doing. But, oh, it's everyone saw him like going, oh, Jesus. Okay, so, ready? Count of 3. We are going to tell an entire story using no words. We are just going to use body language. Ready? So on the count of 3, we're going to zip it, lock it, put it in our pocket. 1, 2, 3. about that story is, first of all, I was being nice because there's a whole other part where you actually have to blow the bubble up, crawl inside the bubble, and do one of these numbers. But I thought I'd be nice. But what's cool about this story, I want to tell you. First of all is the fact we didn't use any words, and we all knew what we did the entire time, right? Well, that was, again, that oxytocin I was talking about. We immediately started empathizing and syncing up and matching up with people in a non-verbal storytelling situation. Just like that. That's what we did. And I think that's really cool that our brains are powerful enough that without saying a single word, we all knew exactly what was going on, and we all could play along, and we all had our imaginations going all at once. And this whole room was in sync. And not once did I say, okay, we're going to blow up a bubble, and we're going to pop it, then we're going to put 3 bubbles and pop all. I didn't tell you guys any of that. And yet we all did it, and everybody knew everything we were doing. So body language, can't undersell the importance of body language. Okay, next 2 things I'd like to say. I came up with this a couple years ago, and I like it. I don't care if anybody else likes it, I'm going to say it. I was at Savannah Middle School, and I was talking about the art of storytelling, and this clicked into my head. We're going to talk about sound effects, and we're going to talk about voices next. And sound effects and voices are like the bacon bit that is the salad of your story. Oh. I don't care if you guys don't like that. That's brilliant to me. What I mean by that is the salad is the story, and it's a good story. It can still be a really good salad without any bacon bits in it. But you know what? If you just occasionally throw in something special, wow, then you're like, hey, that's bacon. That was really good. And so changing your voice a little bit or adding a sound effect to the story will make it so much better. So, for instance, if you're telling a story and you talk about the time you ran out of the house and you threw on your coat and zipped it up really fast, what sound is that going to make? Zip. Exactly. Zip. Not zip. No. I mean, even if you just said, I ran out of the house and threw on my coat and zipped it up quickly, it's still more interesting if you said, zipped it up quickly. Zip. Because then people are like, oh, wait, what was that? They're going to pay attention. If your cat jumps up on the table and knocks the lamp on the floor, what sound does that make when it hits the ground? Yeah, it's going to make some sound. It's boom. No, it doesn't say boom. It breaks. And again, you just want to kind of pepper those throughout your story, and you don't have to use them a lot. Just every once in a while. If you throw something like that in your storytelling, it's going to make it that much more special. If you rely on that heavily, and you just do sound effects for everything, well, then it's like you didn't even have the salad. It's just a big bowl of bacon, which it is entertaining all in itself. It's not a story. It is not a story. I got in the car, and I turned it on, and I drove down the road, and I saw a cow, and I honked at me. That's just annoying. That's not even a good story. So, use sound effects occasionally. Throw them in there. And especially if you're the kind of person that normally doesn't do sound effects. We're going to talk about voices here in a second, especially if you don't do voices. Next time you tell a story to somebody, if you throw one of those in, I guarantee they're going to go, whoa, what'd you do? And they're going to pay attention. That is what sound effects are great for. They make people pay attention to you. Now, voices is a little bit different. I already had a bunch of programs today, so forgive me for drinking in front of you guys. It is water. I know someone will suspect, but anyway. Okay, so voices. When I read books at schools and I read books at daycares, I was at a Head Start today reading, I use voices for all of my characters in the books. Do you have to? No, there's some fantastic readers that I've heard read books that don't do voices at all. What they do is they do change their voice, even if they're not aware they're changing their voice. They're maybe changing the volume. That definitely changes your characters. They might just be slowing down their talking or speeding up a little bit. That is changing it. So when I say doing voices, I'm not saying you all have to be Rich Little. I'm just saying you change it a little bit. Slow your tempo down, speed your tempo up. Talk a little bit slower than normal. That's fine too. Or even a little bit louder, a little bit quieter. It's going to change the entire setting of a story if you start telling it like this. So changing your voice even just a little bit makes a tremendous difference on the stories that you tell, whether you're reading it from a book or you're just telling even anecdotal stories. Try changing your voice a little bit. I do, however, think everybody in here can do character voices. Occasionally I have people who say, no, I can't. Any of you guys thinking that when I said that? No, I saw a couple of you already. All right, well, here's the thing. We all can do character voices. And it's just some people do it more frequently. And it's just like any other art form. The more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. And so I'm going to prove to you guys right now, we all have at least 3 voices. Now, most picture books, if you ever go to read those to a child, it's going to be hard-pressed to find one that has more than 5 speaking characters. They'll occasionally be out there, but most of the time, 5's about the limit. Like the 3 Little Pigs. Narrator, 3 pigs, wolf. Little Red Riding Hood. Narrator, Red, Grandma. Wolf, woodsman. I guess you could say mom if you wanted to give her any speaking lines at the beginning. But still, not many. Now there's always that joker that goes, what about Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs? Well, then just don't make any more dwarfs talk. I don't know. But really, all of us in this room have at least 3, and I know we have way more than that, but I'm just going to go over 3 with you guys. You noticed in all of those, the first thing I said was the narrator. The narrator is the storyteller. So who should the narrator sound like? Yourself. Yeah, it should sound like you. You shouldn't have to change your voice for a narrator. I recorded a demo for an audiobook one time, and it came back to me, the publisher liked it, the sound engineer liked it, it got to the author, and he said, this guy sounds too young. And so they came back and they asked me if I would read the whole thing in an older voice. I go, no. Which is weird that I would say no, but the idea of the narrator having to talk in something that's not my normal voice didn't make sense to me. So your narrator should sound like you. So on the count of 3, I want everybody to say, today is Monday, just in your normal speaking voice. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Today is Monday.
Boom! One of the 3 voices out of the way. Okay, so next easiest way to change your voice is to change the pitch. By changing the pitch, we're going to get 2 more voices, and boom, we will have our 3 voices. So by changing the pitch, we're going to go lower first. Some people are going to be able to go really low in here. Some people, not so much, and that's okay. This isn't a competition to see who's going to sing bass for the Oak Ridge Boys soon. This is more just changing your voice. So even if I went from talking like this to talking like this is definitely a little bit lower than that one, or it could go even a little bit lower than that, or it could go even a little bit lower than that. I don't have to. I can just go however low you want to go. I want you guys on the count of 3 to say today is Monday, just in a lower tone. And I don't want any Smothers Brothers kind of jokes where people start laying on the floor and stuff when I say lower. So ready, count of 3, lower voice, today is Monday. 1, 2, 3.
Today is Monday.
Very manly in here now. Excellent job. The old and terrific. There's other things you can do once you start twisting the lower voices. We'll talk about that in a minute. But if we went lower for that voice, where do we got to go next? Up. We got to go up. Now, in all my years of storytelling, which has basically been as long as I've been talking, I've only heard my voice storytelling 3 times. 2 of those times was doing a higher voice. All 3 of those times, I was dehydrated. And so that's part of the reason why I keep drinking water. If you get to where you are doing stories a lot, hydration is very important. Imagine your vocal cords as a rubber band. If it's just hanging loose without being stretched or pushed together, that's your normal speaking voice. You can hit it all you want. Not strenuous on us at all. Lower would be if it was pushed together. Again, you're not really going to hurt yourself going too low. But your vocal cords kind of tighten up when you're doing a high voice. So if you are stretching a rubber band and you start flicking it a whole bunch of times, what's going to happen? It's eventually going to break, especially if it's dehydrated and it's a dried out rubber band, because then it's going to snap easier. So the 3 times I've hurt my voice, once was lower, but it wasn't necessarily the low voice that did it. I was reading a book at the library called Peter and the Starcatchers, which is the pre-story to Peter Pan, and the voice I gave Captain Hook, even though he's not Captain Hook because he has both of these in that book, the voice I gave him was very much your standard pirate voice, so he talked like this. And then there was another character in the book. His name is Story, and I gave Story a voice that was very much like this. So Story talked like this. That captain talked like this. And one night they had a 20-minute conversation. And the next day I could not talk. I just really roughed my voice up too much. But the other 2 times, it's going high. So I mention that because even though you guys are all playing along and you're all going higher, do not push yourself. Also, I shouldn't have to say this to adults, but higher pitch does not mean more volume. When I do this one in schools, for some reason it turns into like dogs across the street. Anyway, so on the count of 3, higher pitch. Some are going to go a little bit higher, some are going to go pretty high. It's totally up to you. Today is Monday in a higher voice. 1, 2, 3. Oh, you guys are so nice. Good. 3 voices. We've got 3 voices out of the way right there. Now, you might say, well, I'm not reading books to kids. What are you talking about? How can I use this in my storytelling? Well, I use voices all the time. When I tell stories about like my grandpa, I change my voice for my grandfather. Typically, the voice I use for him is like this. He's like, get in there. And I don't do that when he's around because he has canes and he likes to hit people. He does not like that voice. My mom, when I tell stories with my mom, I always have her sound like this, and my mother does not sound like this. And when I tell stories with my dad, I always go a little bit lower. That is not true at all because my dad sounds a lot like I do. But that's just not enough of a distinction. You're doing that so your audience, it's more pleasing for them to hear the story. You don't constantly have to go, and then my dad said, or then this guy said, or then she said. If you've already given a voice to that character, believe it or not, once you give a voice to a character, whether it's in a book or just in an anecdotal story, you have given them an entire life. You can read a book and be like, oh yeah, these characters are good, but for some reason when you add a voice to that character, that makes them real for some reason. Whether that's, like I said, in a book or in a story you're just telling. And if they're real, you don't have to constantly refer back to them, and it's really, it makes your story more complete. Now, if you were going to practice doing voices, especially if you're going to storytell with little kids, which is kind of what tonight's all about, don't worry about doing good impressions. Don't worry about that. What I frequently do is I love to listen to interesting voices. I still watch cartoons, but I don't have to watch cartoons. 680 on Sunday nights does When Radio Was. If you guys aren't familiar with that program, awesome. Old-time radio shows. Love listening to that stuff. But sometimes if somebody has an interesting enough voice, I keep asking them questions so they keep talking so I can hear their voices. I listen a lot. And that's what I'm going to ask you guys to do with your voices, is kind of listen. Now, you're not doing voices to make fun of somebody. You're doing voices to give life to your characters. But what you can do is you can listen and you can develop, and you're not trying to sound exactly like SpongeBob. Because that's what happens. I do this program at a school, and I have a little kid that comes up and says, listen, I sound just like SpongeBob. Hi, I'm SpongeBob. And I go, that was good. This didn't sound anything like SpongeBob. But that's okay. I'm not going to tell the kid that. He did it. Yeah, you tried. Good job. And the thing is, when adults do voices, big tip is don't tell people who you're trying to do. Just do the voice. I did a story time once, and for some reason, typically, certain animals have certain voices in books when I read them. Like, if I just pick up a book blind, somebody hands me one and says, read this. If there's a cow, 9 times out of 10, the cow is going to talk like this, and I don't know why, but that's how the cows talk. But that's how they talk in my books. Well, I was reading a book of story time, and for some reason, a voice popped into my head for a horse. And the horse talked like this. It was so weird. I don't know why he was talking like this. And I got done, and then somebody goes, that was the worst John Travolta I've ever heard. And I was like, I was hoping nobody knew that's what I was doing. Now, had I go, hey, parents, check this out, it's John Travolta, then they would have been like, you were way off. So just don't tell people. Don't tell people who you're trying to do. Just throw it in there. I do recommend practicing. If you want to practice your voice, practice. My 2 favorite places to practice is alone by yourself at home. Do not announce it though. You don't want to say to anybody else in your household, I'm going to my room to practice my voices, because then doctors get called. And it is not pleasant. Just do it. Or in the car, practice in the car. My hands down favorite place to practice my voices, and please use this, is the drive-thru. It's kind of gotten to be one of those things whenever any of my kids, either of my children have friends with them, and we go through a drive-thru, they start making requests. So when I go up through the window, I order all the food in a certain voice. And I absolutely love it. Now, if you guys are going to practice this and try this out, which I really strongly recommend, nothing will improve your day more than doing this. But anyway, is like you go up and order in a voice. The most popular one my kids request is my terrible Elmo impression. So I'll go up and I'll be like, "Hey, we need a Happy Meal! Dr. Pepper to drink with number 3 extra meal." And then I get up to the window, and when they're like, "That's 9:54," I go, "Hey, thanks, man." Because then they're like, now it's fun when there's people in the car, but really try it by yourself, because then it really messes with them. Because then they're just like, if I can't understand them, it's more like this. All right, I need 2 tacos and I need a big burrito. And then I get up to the window and I totally drop it. Hey, how are you? Highly recommend doing it. But it's a good way to practice your voices. I mentioned you don't do voices to make fun of people, and that is absolutely true. There are certain books I don't read just because I don't feel comfortable. Like I said, certain characters in certain books have certain voices when I read them, and if it makes you feel uncomfortable, guess what? It's probably going to make somebody else feel uncomfortable, so don't do it. I know that probably sounds weird that I'm talking about a picture book, but anybody know Skippy John Jones? There's enough daycare workers and stuff in here. I'm sure some of you know Skippy John. I have people all the time like, read Skippy John Jones, because it would be great when you read it. And I can't read it. I read it one time, and I felt the whole time like I was doing the banditos from Treasure of Sierra Madre. And I just felt like, oh, the PC police are going to be in here any second. So I don't read that book anymore. So don't do anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. You're not doing voices to make fun of people. You're just doing it to enhance your stories. I do want to quickly tell you another story, though. This is not like my fishing story. This one is 100% true. I am a certifiable Disney nerd. I'm proud of it even. Hey, we got one back there too. All right. I grew up, I had these 2 aunts that drug me to every single Disney movie in the theater from 1975 up through Tarzan. For some reason I missed Tarzan when I was in the theater, but I've seen all of them since. And so I grew up loving Disney, Disney Channel, all the behind the scenes stuff. Never ever thought I would get a chance to go to Disney World ever. And then when I got married, I said to my wife, I was like, we should go to Disney World. And she said, sure. And I was like, what? And I thought for sure I would go once and get it out of my system and I would be better. And no, it was just the opposite. I went once and now it's like, I gotta go back. And so I was able to, we came into just a little bit of money for something. And I told my wife, I said, you know, our daughter's not quite yet 3. We should go to Disney World again. And because if you go when they're not 3, they're free at the hotels, they're free to the parks, they're free at the buffets. And I'm thinking, we'll have fun. Problem is, my wife was 7.5 months pregnant when we would go. And so I thought, she's not going to do this. And she said, sure. Okay, great. So we actually took my mother-in-law, and I know it's starting to sound like a joke at this point, but we took my mother-in-law so my mother-in-law could hang out with my wife, and me and my daughter could basically run on ahead and meet the characters and have fun. And so we went on this trip. It was in 2005. And if you ever go to Disney World and you stay at a Disney hotel, there are these buses that take you from your hotel to the parks and back again. Just a service included in the price of the resort. And when we went on this particular trip, we got on the bus to go back from the park back to our hotel. And when you do that at night, they turn all the lights down on the bus. And the bus is very quiet, as quiet as a bus can be. And kids are falling asleep and it's kind of relaxing. This particular trip, riding back from the park, bus is quiet, except for 2 people sitting in front of my wife and I. It's my mother-in-law and my daughter behind us, my wife, me, and this couple. And they're just having a little quiet conversation. And I sat the entire bus ride like this. Now, I cannot tell you to this day what they were talking about because I have no idea what they were talking about. I don't consider it eavesdropping. I was just listening to their voices because they had great voices. So when we get back to the hotel, it was decided my wife and I were going to get off at the first bus stop, which is where like the little convenience store was, and we were going to get stuff for breakfast in the morning. And my mother-in-law would take our daughter up to the next bus stop, which would be closer to our hotel room. So we get to the first bus stop, bus driver stops the bus, my wife and I get off. We're the only people to get off the bus. As soon as we get off the bus, I turned to my wife and I said, did you hear the way the people were talking on the bus? I absolutely loved their voices. It was nice, wasn't it? It was so soft. It's kind of rounded at the edges. It was nice. And she, of course, just did her usual. But we walked all the way in, and I didn't drop that voice once. The whole time we walked through this, I'm like, oh no, this is going to be fun. All right, what are we going to get for breakfast? And I ordered all our food like that. All right, I need an orange juice and a chocolate milk. And let's see, I'm feeling a bit peckish right now. Give me a bag of crisps. And I ordered all my food, did the money transaction and everything, and I turned to leave. And guess who was standing right behind us? Now I had two options. One was the smart option, which would be to go. Then there's the dumb option, which is what I chose to do, which was to turn around and say to my friends behind us, so how'd you guys do today? Have fun. And we had a 5-minute conversation. They never once asked me where I was from, which is good, because I have no idea what regionality that is. I would have had to make something, Gloucestershire. I would have been busted. So anyway, we talk, we just kind of chit-chat Disney stuff. I walk away. As soon as we get out of eyesight, my wife turns and, you don't ever do that again. I'm like, oh, sorry, I won't do it again. Problem was, that was the first day of our week-long vacation. And it was their first day of their week-long vacation. We ran into each other every day. And every time we saw them, I had to kick into, so we out today. And looking, we were there yesterday. All right, have fun. Every time. Now, I tell that story to show you the power of how easily it could be misconstrued that you're making fun of somebody. I truly wasn't. I really did just love their voice. But you gotta be careful where you practice, is basically the moral of that story. It's a great story. Really practice your voices. I do a whole presentation, I've done presentations at like corporate workshops and stuff on humor and stress relief. One of the things I tell people is you need to learn to be able to laugh at your life. And you know what, doing something silly, like just talking in a silly voice occasionally, will make you laugh throughout the day. And stress levels are going to go down. And that's like a little side note. I had none of that storytelling, but I just want to try it, really try it. I mean, you guys have played along so far tonight really well. Test it when you go out of here. Now, a couple other quick things. So I've given you the beginning, middle, and end. It's very important. I've talked to you guys about thinking about what the reaction is you're wanting to get out of your audience. We've talked about sound effects. We've talked about body language. We've talked about voices. Time for some homework, and then maybe a story. Homework first. One of the things that I also do is I also get invited sometimes to talk to businesses about storytelling and marketing and storytelling and business. And one of the things I talk to them about is you have to find your why. And when you're talking about to a business and you say you have to find your why, what I mean is you have to figure out why it is you do what you do. And I think that's important. It gives integrity to a business, especially if they're going to turn around and use storytelling as a marketing tool, because they're telling their customers, yeah, we know what product you're selling, but you're telling them why you do it. So it adds a little bit more credibility, adds that empathy to make customers want to do business with you. So it's important. Well, when I started doing those talks, I had to decide, okay, what's my why? I can't stand in front of people and tell people to find their why if I don't know what mine is. And I will tell you, my why of why I get in front of people and I talk about storytelling is that I feel that it is super important. And I also feel that it is a skill and it is an art form that we are losing. We are losing it all the time. Now, I get counter arguments from people who say, oh, there's still books being written, there's still TV shows, there's still movies, there's still video games that are, yeah, I guess those are true. But especially if you start looking at movies and TV, it's just recycling old stories. A lot of it. I mean, we're not telling stories. But the part that makes me sad, or that really hits me, is in 2011, I had a heart attack at the age of 36. And I had 2 kids. And I have stories. So, that is my why. That's why I tell stories. So your homework is this. 1, tell a story this week. I don't care who. On the way home, if you carpool, tell a story to whoever you're with. Something that happened to you that day, something that, hearing the fishing story reminded me of the time I went and did this with my dad or whatever. I don't know, tell a story. So that's first homework, is tell a story, remember all those tips, try to incorporate those in your story. Does your story have a beginning, middle, and end? Are you going to use voices? Not all stories need voice, but Try it. Give it a shot. Think about your body language, but tell a story. Second part of your homework, and this is the one that I'm really serious about. And I have been very fortunate the last, 4 or 5 years. I've been on the Artists in the Schools roster for the Performing Arts Association. So I get to go into schools and I get to teach them the same stuff I just talked to you guys about tonight. And I always give them this homework and I say that, I laugh a lot. But this is the serious one. I want you, I'm telling from the other side, I want you to tell a story to a kid about a time when you were little. That's what I want you to do. It may sound tricky, because sometimes kids may just go, ugh. But you know what? That's when you need to hone your storytelling skills and make them not be the people that look at their watches and look at their phones to get away from you. If you hone your storytelling skills, they're going to want to hear that story. Tell them a story about when you were little. Engage them in a conversation. You know what? Develop their storytelling skills. Ask them what they're doing today. I had a friend of mine who was giving me a hard time once because I love listening to my kids' dreams. Like what they dreamt about the night before. Most of it, I get totally lost. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. But it's developing their storytelling. It's important. But I tell the kids when I go to schools, I said, I want you to ask a grown-up to tell you a story about when they were little. And I want you to really, really listen. Because the thing is, like that Disney World story, I like it. It is very true. I mean, that 100% true that story is, which is what makes it better. But what I tell people is, what if that story made a difference in one person's life? That's important. That's pretty impactful right there. But what happens if that happened to me, and before I had a chance to tell anybody, I was crossing the street and a bus hit me? What happened to that story? The story is gone. All our stories are gone. So, that's why it's important. That's why storytelling is one of those art forms where we can't let it die. So, tell a story, and I want you to tell a story to a kid sometime this week. Tell them a story about when you were little. Now, I also tell the kids this, that if they ask grown-ups to tell them a story about when they're little, most grown-ups have to do this face. And it's not because we're old and having to remember. You'll probably be doing the same thing I do when my kids ask me, which is filtering out inappropriate content. You gotta do that. So do that. And I think we have just enough time. I do want to actually tell you guys a quick story. I've told you some anecdotal stories. I want to tell you another story. This story actually came from a book. And the reason I like to end my programs with this particular talk, or this story, is, well, I'll tell you at the end why. But this came from a book. The book is Bark George by Jules Pfeiffer, and I absolutely love telling this story. I give that book full credit for developing me into the storyteller that I am in the St. Joe community. Because that was the first one that I read where the kids were like, oh, and paid attention. So, it's a great story. Problem is I don't use the book anymore because the book gets in my way. And I'm going to tell you guys the story. Now, for me to tell the story, I have to get the dog. And I had him waiting on here, so you guys just hang out for a second. Dog, sit in here. Okay, we're ready for you, George. This way. We're right in front, please. There you go, you're doing good. Stop in the middle. In the middle! Good, right there, perfect. This is George. This is the story of this little puppy, and he's super cute. Now, you guys in the back probably can't see him, so do that. Now, can you see him? Aww. If you still can't see him, because sometimes people can't, I advise you cross your eyes, stick your tongue out the side of your mouth like this, and wiggle your head back and forth as fast as you can. I'm just kidding, that didn't do anything. Just see where you go. All right, so I'm going to say you right there, George. So this came from a book, Bark George by Jules Pfeiffer. You ready? I'm ready. The story goes like this. One day, George's mom walked up to George and she said, Bark, George. George looked up at his mom and said, No, George, cats say meow, dogs say. No, Bark, George. George looked up at his mom and said, No, George, ducks say quack, dogs say. No, Bark, George. George looked up at his mom and said, No, George, pigs say like dogs say. Now bark, George. And this time, George thought about it for a very, very long time because he wanted to make his mom happy and proud of him. So he thought, and finally he said, Well, Well, this scared George's mom because, as you guys can all see, George is just a little puppy. He is not supposed to sound like those animals. So she took him to an animal doctor, which is called a, very good kids, a veterinarian. And the vet said, gotta get to the bottom of this. Bark, George. George looked up at the vet and said, so the vet went over to his drawer and he got out a rubber glove, and he took that rubber glove and he stretched it all the way down to his wrist, and he opened up George's mouth and he reached deep, 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 deep inside of George's mouth, and he pulled out a cat.
Oh.
Bark again, George. This time George said, so the vet looks in there again. Went over to his drawer and he got out a bigger glove and he stretched this one past his wrist and halfway down his forearm, and he opened up George's mouth and he reached deep, 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 deep inside of George's mouth, and he pulled out a duck. Bark again, George. This time George said, oink. So the vet opened up George's mouth a third time. This calls for an even bigger glove. And he got out a bigger glove, and this one went past his wrist and past his forearm and all the way down to his elbow. He opened up George's mouth. He reached deep, 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 deep inside of George's mouth, and he pulled out a pig. Bark again, George. And this time it was George that got scared because he remembered what sound came out of the pig sound. But his mom said to do whatever the doctor asked. So George said, Vet looked in there one last time. This calls for the biggest glove I've got. And he got out a glove that went past his wrist and past his forearm, past his elbow, all the way up to his shoulder. He opened up George's mouth and he reached deep, 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 deep inside of George's mouth. And he pulled out a cow. Whew, cows are heavy. Bark again, George. He did it. George did it. Let's hear it for George. And George's mom was so happy that she kissed the vet. That's not how dogs kiss. And she was so happy she kissed the cat, and she kissed the duck, and she kissed the pig, and she even kissed the cow. And outside the doctor's office, there were all kinds of people out on the sidewalk. George's mom wanted to show him off to everybody, so she got their attention. She went, "Bark, George." And George looked at everybody on the street, and he said, "Hello." And that is Bark, George. I want to tell you guys why I like that story so much. And it worked in here too, for those of you guys who could actually see up here. The reason I like this story, especially if I get like a whole gym full of kids, and with the teachers in the room, of course, is I say, how many of you guys can see the dog? And there's always some people who play along and go, oh yeah, I see the dog. And then when I hold him up, a few more are like, okay, I'll play along. And then when I do the crossing your eyes thing, everybody's just being silly. But what's funny with that story is we all know as adults, there's no dog in this room. But when I tell that story, and I'm the vet reaching into that dog's mouth, I look at George one time, and then I look up here. Whether it's a room full of adults or it's a room full of kids, do you guys want to know where everybody who could see me was looking? They were looking at an invisible dog. And if that is not a testimony to how powerful stories can be, then I don't know what is. I just made a room full of people look at an invisible dog. So even if we take all that science gobbledygook I said at the beginning about oxytocin, which is all 100% true, and we start talking about family history, stories are powerful. I mean, they are powerful, powerful things. And what better way to connect with kids? And you know what? When we start talking empathy, you start hearing, okay, I was getting ready to get in my soapbox. I'll get it anyway. Who cares? I'm up here. So, frequently I hear people just being in my line of work and working with children. I have people all the time that say, hey, what is wrong with kids nowadays? Why do they just don't think about other people? Well, you know, I don't think that's true. I do think kids think about people. I think kids do have a lot of empathy and sympathy. But you know, I think kids also don't get that, they don't exercise that empathy as much as we do. And if science is already proving that storytelling releases this oxytocin which creates empathy, why would we as a society of adults not tell more stories? So, I hope you guys had fun. I have fun when I do this stuff.
And we are 12, 9, 5, and 3. Sorry. And so I've definitely seen in my home some very different types of readers, to some who really thought books were great, to some that thought that maybe it'd be a colorful place to use their crayons. So we're basically just going to go through a few different ways to inspire kids to really get into books, all right? So starting with really the first and the second items on your list are to start with, a variety of books. And I like to usually keep my books in a basket, the ones that we read a lot. Now, if you've read with any sort of toddler more than once, you quickly learn that they find books that they like to read over and over and over again. They find favorites. And there's a real reason for that. The reason that they find a favorite book and they make you read it 1,000 times is because they're connecting the neurons in their brain. And they're making those neurons faster and more efficient. And so the more often that you read something to them, the faster their brain works for that piece of information. So it's a really cool bit of knowledge to lean on, because then you can get a toddler who doesn't say a whole lot that makes sense, right? They kind of do some gibberish and some English in there. But they can speak book to you. If they have a book that they read over and over and over again, then they will refer to that book. They will use that book in life. They will generalize that information. And so you can use that book in a variety of ways. Now, I like to start, come on in. What? This is Raising a Reader with United Way Success Recipes. Come on.
They're downstairs. I'm sorry.
Oh.
No, to the jail.
Anyway, I like to start before babies are born with a book. I like to start with books that are easy to read, that have a kind of a call and response feel to them, so that when baby's in utero, you can read the book. One of my favorites is Moo Ba La 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 by Sandra Boynton. So you start with a cow says, a sheep says, and 3 singing pigs say, la la la. No, you say that isn't right. The pig says, all day and night. And it goes like that. Well, in the beginning, you read the book. That's just what you do. And it's an easy book, and you, as grown-ups, memorize it. And then toddlers start to speak, and they memorize it too, because you've read it 2,000 or 3,000 times. And so then you're in the car, you're driving along, and they're throwing a fit, and you're like, you're just tired, you're tired of being trapped in that thing. So then you can pull that out of your head, and you can say, hey, a cow says, and the back seat says, moo! And you say, a sheep says, bah! And then they get into it, and they start to do the book with you, because they memorize it with you. It's a part of them. And then it's also a great tool to pull out in the grocery store, a memorized book, so that you can be shopping, and they're all over the place, and then you can talk your book. You can say your book, and they'll do it with you because they've memorized it. And then kids that are really readers very early will just make references to books. And it's really cool, because you'll drive down the road and you'll see a barn, and they'll say, hey, it's like Big Red Barn. Big Red Barn's a really great book, or they'll see a great big mastiff walking down the street in the springtime and go, oh, it's like Clifford. They'll start to identify with those characters and refer to them. And so it's really cool to see a little kid talk the book to you. Grown-ups will do it. They'll read a book and they'll really talk about it. And kids will do it too. So that's my goal, is that you can create those relationships with toddlers and preschoolers and books, and really get that conversation going before babies are big and go off to school. So in addition to a variety of books, in my kitchen, we have the squishy chair. So the squishy chair, you can see, is wide enough. I've got 4 kids, right? So it is big enough for 2 here, 1 on each side, usually 1 on the lap. Now, a 12-year-old, he doesn't really snuggle up for a book anymore. He will read a book with you. He will talk book with you. But he's not going to snuggle up in the chair with me anymore. But I have a chair, a squishy chair, comfy enough that we can all pile into it and sit down and snuggle up with a book. It's in my kitchen. It's not in my living room. It's not in the nursery. It's never been in a nursery. I was raised, I'm sure like lots of you, that you snuggle in bed and read a book and drift off to sleep, and I still love to do that. That's how I get to sleep most nights, is I find a book to snuggle up with, and I drift off to sleep. And I usually have to start over on the same page the next day. And in order to really make books a living part of your life, having that reading area somewhere else in the home is important. Because then it is not just part of your bedtime routine. It's part of how we live and how we function. We'll snuggle in this chair with the grocery ads and make the list for them. And we'll snuggle in this chair with the newspaper and we'll look up the big sisters and brothers and see their pictures in the good for you section of the newspaper. We'll snuggle up in this chair with the Friday folders from school and from preschool and look at the notes from the week. And so reading is an integral part of our life. And it happens with paper and cardboard very often. But it doesn't only happen at night, under the covers, as you're winding down. It happens all throughout the day, all throughout life. So that's why I chose to put my comfy chair in the kitchen. It's the largest room in my home. It's the brightest room in my home. It's where, honestly, as mom, I spend a whole lot of time. There's a lot that happens around the kitchen table. And projects will come in during the day, books will float by, and the kids always know that they can pull out a book, they can sit down and they can read. And it's great for calming. You know, look at those preschoolers that are really beginning to explore emotions. That can be ugly. It can be. I mean, you know, you get to toddlers, they throw a fit, you make sure they're safe, and you go, hey, let me know when you're ready to calm down, and we'll fix this problem, right? But then you get your preschoolers and they're really exploring emotions. Well, books do that. You just have to find the right one. And what are the topics going on in your life? Maybe you have a goldfish that's died, so you need to find a book about something passing away. Maybe you found a stray animal that looks really sickly in your neighborhood. Well, there's a great book called Spooky that my kids found randomly at the library one day that you read over and over and over again. Books inspire kids, and so my chair has been slept in because we read Imogene's Antlers, and Imogene's antlers come out of her head, and so poor Imogene has to learn to sleep in the living room chair sitting up because her antlers are in the way, which has inspired my children to decide that a pillow and a blanket and a child can fit in this chair all night long. I don't know how good the sleep was that night, but it's happened. And my kids had also decided this is a bunk bed. You know, you can get one on top and one on the floor. It works pretty well. And then hard discussions will happen in this chair too. It's a part of our emotional or social emotional development in our home. So having a great place to read, you can all pile around. It's comfy. I've spent time as a preschool teacher. I've spent time as an elementary school teacher. I've spent a lot of time on the floor. I don't always want to be on the floor. So this is my comfy chair. Recliners are great for piling people into. Keeps you close. You know, if you read on a giant couch, they kind of stretch out. If you're in a chair close by, they'll fit. So, technology. I love technology. I don't use it so well. I'm always losing emails or reading a text while driving and then forgetting what I was supposed to respond to and then missing appointments or other things. But these little screens can hold books. I mean, they can hold movies, yeah, you can play video and keep them entertained, or you can find a book. Our library systems have ways to look at books, picture books, through devices. So Tumble Books is the name of the program that you're looking for when you log on to the library websites. But you can look up Tumble Books, and Tumble Books is full of picture books for kids. And you can set the settings so that it will read to the child. You can set it so that you can read to the child. They can flip through the pages one at a time on the screen or on the screen on your tablets. And there are tons of, this is a Kindle. And Kindles and Nooks are very typical e-reader type devices. But the apps are out there. I bought, at Christmas time, I bought a tablet that looks just like this. It's about exactly the same weight. for $50 at Kohl's. Just a tablet, not real fancy, a couple of gigabytes, and then you just hook it up to the Wi-Fi and look for Tumble books there. It's all free. Logging on with your laptops and desktop computers to the library websites. You can find Tumble books there. You can find free books to download on your devices. It's pretty cool stuff. And that gets me to, so love devices. Devices. Because the words are still there. It's in technology that our kids are going to use. I mean, we can complain that they don't write and read cursive very well, but I can look at school lettering posters from 150 years ago. I can't read that cursive. You know, it's got all those extra loops and lines and fanciness that I can't read. Technology changes and we change with it, and we have to prepare the kids for that. So, use your devices, but not always. I have here a variety of books. So books need to, at the beginning, be cloth or plastic or really chunky cardboard. They need to be, I like books even smaller than this for your babies, because they fit in those little tiny hands and they can open up. This is a Dr. Seuss book. It's got a lot of words in it. In the beginning, you want picture books that are just pictures. I picked this one tonight, though. I've got time set aside to do an activity where you make a book. I picked this book. This is called The Shape of Me and Other Stuff, because it's silhouettes of images. This is kind of hard to see all the way here. But, you know, these are elephants and hearts and stars. It's silhouettes. You don't see the detail. And a kid can look at that and go, oh, that's a key. You know, they can see that, and it's not an actual image or anything like that. You figure it out. And then they feel good. They feel confident because they know what that picture is. They figured it out. It's a good way to start. Board books can get complicated and have lots of stories in them, lots of images. They can have holes in them, faces, whatever. They can be gimmicky. You know, there's some great books out there that have train tracks in them and trains that run around them. And that's entertaining and fun. Books that use songs are good. You know, Five Little Monkeys, Wheels on the Bus, and both of those are choices for what you need. Song increases memory. So if you're singing Wheels on the Bus, or Five Little Monkeys, or Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and you've got those words going and you do them over and over and over again. You add a picture book to it, so now you've got images with it. You add actions, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Then you've got some kinetic, some motor learning going with that. So you're activating more of the brain. Here we go. So then our little people get bigger and they start to become preschoolers, and they get interested in things like counting and matching and numbers and colors and animals, and you know their desire for nonfiction information kind of grows. And so you can incorporate numbers through counting as you walk down the stairs. And you can look at books and count the images of the animals and things like that. Always looking at the world and going, okay, how can I beef this up a little bit? You know, as you walk along, and then you grab the books and you go, oh, there's birds. Well, look at these birds. These are pretty fancy birds. Maybe we can find other books about these birds next time we go to the library or next time we go to the bookstore. Those are pretty fun looking. And then we can take a field trip to the pet store and see a bird just like this in real life. Make it grow and give it kind of other life. Make the book live. Okay. So, community resources. Library programs. Modeling good habits, by the way, read. If you don't read, they won't read. So read in all those ways I mentioned before. Make it a part of your everyday life. But community resources for reading. So books are expensive. And if your kids eat them, they feel even more expensive. So our libraries have great lists of books that you can kind of look at like goals. You know, we've got 100 books to read before a kid goes to first grade. And they're classics. They're usually easy to find. They're easy to memorize a lot of times. Pass one down. 100 books every child should hear before they go to first grade. You know, and we always start with tips for reading to your kids, and then lots of classic books. You know, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, Chicka Chicka Boom Boom, all that fun stuff. So our libraries are great resources for making books come alive and using books in different ways. The East Hills Public Library has a Reading Cups program. So you can go, and I believe it's the first Saturday of every month. You can go in, and the dogs are usually in the very back of the library. And so on the way, little people pick books off the shelf, and they go back into the room, and they snuggle up with a puppy dog, and they read to the dog. Now, really little babies just turn pages. They just sit there by that dog, and they pet that dog, and they just turn pages. And then preschoolers will start to talk about, they'll point to those pictures, and they'll say, hey, there's a dog like you. And we'll start to pick out images and talk to the dog and tell them what they see in the book. And then your bigger kids, your kindergartners and the olders, will start to read the book to the dog. And they're really cool dogs, and they're trained to listen. Because when a child has trouble reading, and they start to lose their confidence with reading, it's hard to read aloud. And so the Reading Pups program is a program that is designed for early elementary school age children and helping them to build their confidence as readers, because the dogs always listen. But it is definitely a program that's accessible for all ages. Other of our favorite reading programs at the library would be the family read-alouds that Mr. Will does, Will Speck, at the East Hills Public Library. He starts a new book at the end of this month, I would say March 30th. And basically, it's like going to the library and have Mr. Will read you a book for 3 weeks. So he reads aloud. You sit in the comfy theater seats, and you kick up your feet, and you and your kids sit there, and he reads to you aloud from the book. And he uses character voices and expression, and it's a really cool way to have somebody read to you. Because they always want you to read, and I don't know about you, but I'm not really good with all the voices. I can pretty much do a girl voice and a boy voice. I mean, I don't have a lot of variety of voices. So to have someone as talented as that set aside time for their family is very cool. And then they do family movie nights, and a lot of times those family movies are based on a book. And I think the family movie night this month is the Lego movie. So currently there's a Lego program going on in the library. And you can go in and get your slip. You can do brick math to figure out what the math problems and answers are in order to win some free Legos. Or you can color your own minifigure. And so it's an activity that is designed for all ages. And then just return that and go to the family movie night and see if you win. Other favorite library programs, they have great summer programs where they bring in guest speakers from all over the country that do magic shows and animal shows and oh gosh, I've seen science, I've seen things blow up in the library. But lots of really cool weekly programs throughout the summer. And then there's workshops, puppetry, and puppetry is a very cool way to make books come to life. There are science where kids just go and learn about science, and they read about an experiment, and they put the experiment together, and they have a little science in the middle of the week. It's very cool. The Rolling Hills Consolidated Library has a baby story time. It's one that you have to sign up for, but it's a weekly baby story time. All of the libraries have weekly preschool story times, so you just have to look at, okay, what libraries in my neighborhood, and see what times those programs are. And then there's also story time at the mall, at East Hills Mall, and that's cool stuff again. Very entertaining, that guy. So, and this is going on at the library. This is really cool. So they're having a Peeps show. So you use those little peeps that you see in the stores right now to make a diorama of a book. So your children can choose Little Red Riding Hood, or Oh, the Places You Can Go, or Red Barn Farm, and make a diorama of a book inside of a shoebox. And you drop it off at the library, and then people vote on their favorite one, and then there are prizes. So, another way to make books come to life. So, just check out. Okay, so movies and books. Oh, I was thinking interacting with characters. I was going to torture you. Interacting with characters in books. So role play in a book. There are classic fairy tales that we all know. Little Red Riding Hood, The Three Little Pigs, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Cinderella. And lots of classic fairy tales that kids know, or need to know, learn to know. I mean, in this case, they run across them in all sorts of media. So I was going to torture you and make you guys act out the book. But it's a sunshiny day, and I don't need entertainment anymore because I had a great day. But to act out a book, I can remember my oldest, the first time his preschool class acted out Three Billy Goats Gruff. And we had not read Three Billy Goats Gruff. Kid couldn't believe we hadn't read it. We hadn't read it, and he comes home, who's that trick dropping over my bridge? And he's acting it out, and lots of expression, and really enjoying acting out the only part of the book he could remember, but having a great time with it. And so take the time to, when there are parts of books that repeat, like the pigeon books that Mo Willems does about, don't let the pigeon drive the bus, and don't give the pigeon a hot dog or whatever. Those books are fun. Can I drive the bus? No. Please, no. And they'll get into it and they'll say it with you. So those are fun. Lots of fun. So act those books out. You can huff and blow your house down. You can be loud with the book and have a great time. So it's a lot easier to be brave in your own kitchen than it is. So, book and movie pairings. I mentioned the family read aloud that begins on March 30th. That's The Tale of Despereaux. And of course, that is also an animated movie. And so you could read the book and then rent the movie or find it on YouTube or Amazon or Netflix, something like that. You can find the movie and watch it. So read the book and watch the movie. So there's James and the Giant Peach, and Madeline, and Stuart Little, and there's some really great ones. What is the one that was just in the theaters that was just booked like crazy? Annie's a good one. What?
Wild things.
Wild things? What's that?
With meatballs.
How do meatballs? What?
Cinderella's coming out.
Cinderella's coming out. I think it just came out. I've seen pictures of people going to see that one. It was one where the title didn't really tell you what it was about. It was really cool. It was booked. I didn't get to go see it because it was sold out. Like every time I went to try to see it, it was sold out. And this was like just a couple weeks ago. And it wasn't an adult movie. It was a kid movie. But there are lots of great. And the other thing about if you do a book and a movie, you know, you sit down and have a family movie night, you need popcorn, but like James and the Giant Peach, you know, do that when peaches are in season. Make a peach pie, eat some peaches, and really get into it. Talk about it. And you can read chapter books to little kids. You really can. When a kid becomes a reader and they will sit still for the books, you really can read. You're not going to read a whole chapter every night. You might read half of a chapter or a few pages. And when you process it, you talk about it. What happened? What happened last night? You know, when last time you read this, what did you hear? What did you think about that? Talk about that with your 3-year-old and your 4-year-old. And no, the book we're currently reading is The Wizard of Oz. And I'm reading it with my 3-year-old and my 5-year-old. So I did choose a version of it that isn't very scary. And I'm reading it on my Kindle. You know, it's not, so it doesn't even have pictures. Like it doesn't even have, it's not even paper pages. They can't look over my shoulder and try to see what I'm describing. They have to picture it in their head and talk about it. And they do. So food and book pairings, I mean, come on. It doesn't have to be a cookbook to be food and book pairings. Although, you know, a kid's cookbook is a great way to introduce reading for information and creating something. But there's a Dr. Seuss book, 10 apples up on top. You know, it's a quick little book. And then you could talk about apples. You could do a field trip to the apple orchard. Cut apples different ways, different varieties of apples, and talk about taste and color and size. Make your books big. Expand the ideas. I thought I had another one down here that reminded me of food. But maybe I don't. Can you think of any books with food?
Hungry Caterpillar.
Hungry Caterpillar. Oh, yeah. We got sausage and ice cream and watermelon and leaves.
Yes.
I know. Pull out some mint leaves and say, hey, let's take a bite of this. And they, what? No way. Yeah, let's take a bite of this and see what this is about. A little parsley. You know, really explore it. Okay, you could get out some ice cream and some sausages and some water. You can do all that kind of stuff too. I challenge you, get out some leaves. Go to the grocery store and get some green stuff and say, okay, let's have some bites of this stuff. Let's smell it. Let's rub it and smell our fingers. Lemongrass. You know, I challenge you. Go eat some leaves next time you read. And then activities and book pairing. So, in our partnership with the library a few weeks ago, we did a Dr. Seuss birthday brunch bonanza. And in that, the activities were based on different Dr. Seuss books. Those activities, one of those activities was Bartholomew and the Ooglet. Now, there are many, many people that have never read that book, and I don't really blame them because it is many pages long. I would say it's like 50 or 60 pages long. And they're not short pages. But it's basically a story about a guy named Bartholomew, and he was a page in the kingdom of Dick. And Bartholomew did what the king told him to do, but he always kind of felt like the king was a bit silly. Like maybe he just made up work for everybody else because he was a little bored. And one day the king decides that he was tired of what was coming down from the sky. You know, sun, rain, snow, and he was tired of it. And so he had the magicians go up on the mountain and come up with something else that would come from the sky. So they come up with this green goopy stuff, and it falls from the sky, and pretty soon it fills up the whole kingdom. And the birds can't fly because they're stuck to the ground. Nobody can go anywhere, so if there's an emergency, you're just stuck. Because that stuff doesn't go, it doesn't drain anywhere. It just keeps the trees from growing, and it's just awful. Awful, awful stuff. And so eventually the king has to apologize for not being happy with what he had, and kind of being grateful for what was around him. And then all the oobleck went away, and everything was fabulous and good again. So that's the short version of the story for you. So then it's fun to make a bowl of that stuff for yourself to play in. Not for yourself, for the kids. So the kids can play in the oobleck, right? Cornstarch, water, and green food coloring. Easy, easy, easy. And what the cornstarch is missing, I was gonna make some for you, but it's not here. But what this stuff is you stir it all together. And I think it's a cup of cornstarch to half a cup of water, basically. A little bit of green food coloring. Stir it around. It's not easy to stir because here's what happens. When you put pressure on it, it becomes a solid. When the pressure is off, so when you stop pressing on it, then it becomes a liquid and it just kind of melts around the bowl. It's fun to kind of just scoop it together and push it as hard as you can and watch the kids try to make a ball out of it and then have their hands relax and let the stuff melt off their hands. So they've read a book about, being grateful for what they have. They've played in some sort of sensory type material, learned a little bit about science, and then they've also learned some good social emotional stuff in being tense and relaxing, pushing on that stuff and letting go. So you've taken this book that was kind of a chore to read because it's a lot of pages. You've expanded it into other areas and really talking something about it. So that's one of my favorite messy activities. So another favorite book that you see in preschools a lot is the Eric Carle book. I've got it over here. Brown Bear, what do you see? Right? And brown bear, what do you see? I see a yellow duck looking at me. I don't have it memorized very well. So from making your own book, you can learn fractions. It's a color book, right? Brown bear, yellow duck, blue horse, whatever. It's a color book. Create your own and it becomes fractions. It becomes telling what the whole image is from the part. So then we're working the math part of our brain. So what I've got over there for you are materials I have a whole tub of different animals in different colors. Got birds and bears and frogs and lions and tigers. But you just glue it to an index card. These are all stapled together funny. And then, do you know what that is? It is a frog. Can you tell what that is there? It's the tail of something, tail of a bird. Yeah. So it's just, it's kind of another way to, and I don't have any extras of these out, but I can grab some. When you interact with books a lot, you will tend to want to make your own. Now, sometimes that can lead us to grabbing the crayons and coloring in it. And that's not a good idea. The library frowns on that. But your cereal boxes can be saved, and they can become the covers to your books. You can staple some paper in there, and then we can make our own books. So that's just one. And if you would like to make some cereal box books, I can grab some. I've got some extra cereal boxes in the back. You can use these too. Make your own. You can also, with a cereal box, you could take images like this. Because you know what? Even when we are doing tummy time, it's important to look at books. Interact with them, talk about them, put the words with the images that they see. So then we can use our cereal box book. And then we can prop it up in front of our babies on their tummies. I know, you want me to come to your house and play with your trash, don't you? So I've got materials over here for that. So, books are, you know, we read them, but how do we get to the point where we read them? Well, they have letters, and letters have sounds. So how do we get our little people to that? How do we get them to looking at letters and making sounds? Well, if you drive down the road with a little person and you see this big sign with this big yellow thing that looks like this, what do they say? McDonald's! Now, my oldest is a bit quirky. Driving down the road and he sees the sign that says Old Navy. 2 years old, Old Navy. Gets super excited. Old Navy, Old Navy! Well, think back 12 years. What was inside of Old Navy when he was a toddler? It was a big blue truck. So he had identified and remembered that sign, the Old Navy sign, because that store had a big blue truck inside of it. So it was environmental print for him. So they'll read the sign to him down the road. It's a great time to play I Spy. And I Spy with a really little person isn't I spy something blue. It is I spy a dog. And then they're looking out the window and, oh, there's a dog. You're just training their eyes to look for a detail. I spy a truck. You know, and it's pretty easy to do around town, not an easy thing to do if you're on a road trip to Chicago from here, especially across 36 Highway, because pretty much all you spy is beans, corn, and cows. But it does work very early to start to train their eye to look for a detail. And from detail, you can look at signs. From signs, you can look at the letters. So they can look at those big golden arches, and you can say, that's the letter M. And M says, And you start to do that and go, oh, well, Mia's name starts with that sound, and Mom starts with that sound. So start with the letters in their names. Start with the first letter in their name. And schools would like you also to do the capital letter and little letters when you're writing their names. Just as a hint for you. So you're talking about letters and letter sounds. If you're working with preschoolers and you're really hitting those letter sounds hard, make up a song for it. A says app. I'm putting action with it. We're biting the apple. A for apple. So I'm gonna bite the apple. B for baby. C for cat. And just have your sounds, have their bodies moving. These people move and learn, right? So start to introduce those sounds that way. And remember that there's no benefit to being hyperlexic. Hyperlexic means reading early. Once you learn to read, you're a reader. It doesn't matter if you learn that skill at 4 or 6. Once you learn it, you learn it. And so you don't really need to be a 4-year-old who can walk into the lawyer's office and read the contract to mom and dad. It's really not that important. It can make life easier if they go to school knowing their letters of their names and the letter sounds, and they know all the letters in the alphabet. That definitely makes life easier if they've got those basic tools in their tool belt. But do they need to be able to sit down and read the newspaper out loud to you? No, they don't. If they're kids, let them be kids. If they are hyper-focused on it and they are driving that train that way, follow it, hop on with them, let them be readers. But do you need to drag them to it?
No.
No, not at all. It's not fun for anybody. So I often, about 4 times a year, I teach the prenatal class out at Mosaic. And parents at the end of it, a lot of times will ask about the benefit of baby reading programs. And my advice is always, please read to your baby bellies. And read to your babies when they come out, so they can identify what they're hearing with what they're seeing and learn to build a vocabulary. But do you need to give them flashcards so they can read it?
No.
No, not at all. It's not necessary. Unless they're pulling out the flashcards and asking you, then you follow them. You read their cues, that's what they want. More power to them. All right? When you start to do letters and words, start with their name, then family member names, mom, dad, dog, brothers, sisters, that kind of thing. And go from there. Don't worry about it. Have fun with it. All right? Are there any questions? Now, I have a favor to ask. So the favor is, I will, it's a bargain. So, Miss Bobby at the United Way really needs us, this is Jess maybe, this is Jess at the library, really needs us to do these surveys. It's front and back. So if you would please do this survey, I would really appreciate it. We can make a pile. Our tables are set up. We've got pins and stuff like this. We have early childhood screening if you know any preschoolers or private school kindergartners that need a screening. Screening's going on right now, so call us to make an appointment. Our tables are set up for that, so there's pins in the back. So please fill out a survey. I will fill out your certificate. Oh wait, no, you can write your own name. I already signed for you. Those that are here from, for the program through the DFS, your certificate is slightly different, so after you fill it out, I will sign it for you. And then over here, I've got glue and markers and index cards and lots of animals. A green food coloring, please don't play with it. I've cleaned up enough messes today. Staples, or sorry, staplers, whatever those are called. So, make a book. Somebody make me a fabulous book. Alright? So, thank you very much for your time and attention. Don't forget to grab a book. know what you see. Yeah, after a while,
I first saw it like 2 years.
We had, we usually have Sarah and Chastity and Amanda, and then sometimes Alexis and Brooke. But tonight it was just one. I love these.
I'm gonna call it 15.
You own the daycare.
I know, I'm like, wait, right, so they're not. 66.
There. This time of year where it's in the winter,
I can't remember. I think all of them are. I think all of them are preschool.
Thank you. I think all of my fees are coming.
Thank you.
Survey is this one right here, yeah.
I don't really have any
Yeah.
fillers.
Well, and they're fillers that grow right. Give ideas?
You know me.
Yeah.
Information. That's how we learned, or just say Roxy Magnet.
question. Why I'm actually really here is I have a 19-month-old little boy, and he is very well behaved in huge groups. But when it's like one-on-one or just me and my husband, if he like does, let's say he doesn't want to get his diaper changed, he headbutts and slaps. And I don't know where he learned that, but he is very aggressive. And I know he's at the age of slightly understanding, but not to the age where you can really like discipline it in a manner that he understands. So I don't know really what to do when he acts out like that. We set him down, I walk away, but he runs towards me and he wants, to hug and say he's sorry, but then he'll do it again. So it's just...
And at 19 months, they don't understand the ramifications of what they are doing.
Correct.
So it definitely takes patience, because somehow he's picked up that this is how I'm interacting.
Yeah,
and it hurts.
Yeah.
I mean, it can actually hurt you.
Yeah.
But just kind of lightly, grab his head or grab his hand and say, no, that hurts, Mama.
Yeah.
That hurts, Mama. Give Mama a kiss on her forehead.
Yeah.
And gently showing the difference, and he really will pick up on that.
Okay.
It takes a little time.
It's really strange because we're not violent in nature. We don't argue at home.
Sometimes they want the physical interaction, but they really can't
He's
control their limbs.
he roughhouses all the time. So
Yeah.
he's kind of rough in nature, but
I don't
know
believe he's
where he
deliberately
got.
trying to hurt you.
Okay.
He just doesn't know his strength and how to
Yeah.
show affection.
Yeah.
So just work with him on it. And
Okay.
Anybody else? And I'll stay after if you have any individual questions.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
we are going to pass out evaluations to you.
Yeah, I'm
You
gonna
know,
get some more
you do
here,
this
so-
critical job of creating habits with young people at an age when their brain is the most shapeable. So what we're doing now is going to hopefully prevent some bad habits from occurring that when they're 10 or 15 or 20, they've got a lot to unravel. So we thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Eugene. That's really very valuable information. If you wouldn't mind
I'm making out some more here, so.
filling out evaluation for us. If you need a pen, I've got pens here. And let us know, one of the questions asks what you'd like in the future. Let us know what topics interest you. I'll bring some pens to you.
And I got a couple laying on that back table there too, I believe, when I was passing them out. Couple pins. See this from
I do have some of my school district cards up here too. If anyone wants, you think you might email with a question or anything, feel free to email.
Anybody else need a writing utensil? Sorry. Writing utensil. Sorry.